to Momentum Conversations with Dr. Martina Van Norden. On May 10th, 2025, something incredible happened. I, along with other scholar researchers, walked across the stage at American University's School of Education commencement. And in that sacred moment, I was hooded as Dr. Martina Van Norden. What came next? None of us expected. The clip hit TikTok and went viral. The post was one of me in high praise, full of what I call radical joy. The post read, "Whoever's aunt, sister, cousin this is, just want to tell her congratulations on her doctorate degree. I just know it was a long journey." That journey is a collective story of pain, sacrifice, faith, and healing with some of the most passionate, courageous, and brilliant minds. Momentum Conversations is where we share the backstory, the people, the purpose, and the power behind that unforgettable moment. So whether you're showing up with curiosity, courage, or just catching the vibe, I'm glad you're here. Hello, welcome to Momentum Conversations. We are here for our episode 3, From Pencils to Purpose. And we're so excited today to have another one of the amazing cohort members that you have seen on screen. Now, in the tradition of Momentum Conversations, because we believe that the ID and who you are should be defined by who you are. And so today I'm going to invite my dear beloved sister and friend and cohort member to tell you who she is, share her real ID, and let her introduce herself. And I'm welcoming her to Momentum Conversations. And so welcome to where information and inspiration and an intergenerational conversation moves us towards liberation. I'm turning it over to you, Bree.
Hey everyone, super grateful for the opportunity to introduce myself first. I think this is probably the first time I've done that in this space. So my name is Dr. Brianna Nargiso Newton. I like to think of myself as, in layman's terms, a dot connector. I'm an equity analyst by trade, education researcher, policy strategist, and most importantly, a formal Title I educator. And that makes me deeply connected to creating truly liberatory learning environments for all children, especially those from Black and Brown communities. But outside of that, I'm also a wife, I'm a daughter, a granddaughter, and a proud parent to 2 dogs. And I think that my work and my passion both live really at this intersection of research, policy, and lived experience. I come from Title I schools myself, so I know truly the brilliance and the resilience of those communities and all that they hold and the talent and the beauty. But I've also seen how systemic inequities disproportionately harm those students. And that's why my work focuses on what it does, and really centers on belonging, psychological safety, and most importantly, agency, because I believe schools should be those sacred spaces they were cultivated to be, and places of hope and transformation.
Well, you said something about being part of a Title I school yourself.
Absolutely.
And I want us to start with that because oftentimes people hear about Title I schools, but they don't know what that actually means. It's definitely beyond something related to just funding. There is
Yep.
a whole culture, there's a whole system that comes around Title I schools. And so Bree, I would like for you to share. Let me just correct that because we have a very personal conversation. So you all should know that I call her Bree. However, she is Dr. Brianna. And so I call my cohort members by their first name for familiarity, but I put the doctor on it not because of anything other than we earn those achievements.
Yep.
They do not define us, as Dr. Rachel said the last time. They do not make us who we are. They do not make us better or anything like that. They just simply demonstrate to our peers. They are a signal in this system that we have done a certain level of work. And so, Dr. Brianna, I would like for you to share, what does this Title I mean? and how does Title One relate to policy? Tell us that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think what my work tries to do is obviously like we talk about to your point about federal funding in terms of classifications of schools, looking at poverty levels, and the reality that Title One schools specifically and traditionally reflect concentrated poverty in communities. And that is a community that I come from. That is a community that outside of financial status, I'm proud to come from and proud to serve in my research and in my work, my talents as an educator and in the nonprofit space as well. But outside of poverty, my work really situates poverty as an experiential process and situation, not necessarily as an identity marker. And I think in this Title One school space, typically Title One schools are hubs for food security for communities, mental health support, and community care. But traditionally, when we talk about funding, they're largely and disproportionately stigmatized and under-resourced. And I think that even thinking about the political climate that we're in today, and thinking about Medicaid. And a lot of folks, I just wrote an article for The Progressive and thinking about how Medicaid is reflective and disproportionately shows up in the funding of Title One schools, specifically for students in Title One schools who have Medicaid coverage, who are now able to get those services, early detection programs, who are able to see social workers, who are able to see speech language pathologists in Title One schools, and those jobs and those services are covered through Medicaid because schools are able to reimburse Medicaid and get paid for those roles and provide the needs for students who disproportionately have them and don't have access to early detection and other supports in other areas. And so Title One schools outside of the funding structure is so much more, and it means so much more to specifically Black and Brown children experiencing concentrated poverty.
Absolutely. I remember being a special educator and having to fill out those Medicaid forms for our students who did qualify. And the thought of being a practitioner and an educator and certain services related to occupational therapy, related to speech and language, those additional services that students need to be successful, the idea of those additional resources being taken away because of federal policy that translates into state policy, where those decisions of the state education agency makes decisions on who gets what, where are the resources going, the idea of some of the most needy children who have no control over some of their ability levels, no control, needing certain services and not having access is disheartening, which is at the heart of our work. Like, so when people hear our passion around Title One schools, they have to know it is concentrated poverty. And it is poverty upon children that goes unaddressed unless there are people like us who will stand up and say, hey, let's look at this. Let's go deeper into how we are serving these particular students. So I would like for you to share, just give me one story that you experience, whether as an educator or in your research. Give me one story that has been held in your heart as something that moves you, inspires you, motivates you to say, no, this particular story is part of my arsenal of motivation.
Wow, that's such a great question. There's so many that come to mind. Well, maybe I'll share, I guess, my first experience as my first year teaching in a Title One school. I served a large English language learner population as well as a large population of students with disabilities. And I had a student, an incredible student, and this was also smack in the middle of the pandemic. So we're navigating virtual learning, we're navigating English not being a first language, we're also navigating developmental disability. And there was a student, I very specifically remember this, when I was being assigned my class role for the year. there was a lot of conversation, because a lot of the students who were in my third grade classroom, their second grade teachers had moved up to third grade as well. So these were my teacher peers. And I was just asking for additional context on students, how I can best support them throughout the year in planning. And I remember a lot of conversation about just trying to, and I think like a lot of new teachers, novice teachers come in, starry-eyed, wanting to do all the things. And I think that there was a lot of contention about, expect less. Like, this is what these students are able to do. This is what we've seen since they've been in our care since kindergarten. This is what they can and cannot do. And as a new teacher, I was kind of like, can't do, okay. And that's kind of like how I took that sentiment. And throughout the year, something that was really important to me was just to create space. And that I don't know that was something that was taught to me in a teacher prep program. I don't know that this was something that it wasn't in a professional development session, but there was something in me that was just like, create space. And I think, and when the world is burning in flames, when we're looking at insurrections at the Capitol, we're looking at Black Lives Matter, we're looking at all of these things that are happening on top of all of the indicators that I mentioned about the students specifically, just to create space. And that was something that I did very intentionally. And in these spaces, I mean, I would have lunch with my kids on the computer. We would do like cooking classes on the computer. We would have like dance parties where I'm playing music on my computer and kids are just on camera dancing in their rooms, and just anything to create that space in that community. And while I was engaging with my students, something that was really important to me was just to listen to the conversations that they were having. What are the things that interest them? Like, who are the people who are in their camera that they care about? Like, is it mom and dad? Is it little brother? How do we encourage them to be in this space as well? And that was something that I think really built a strong rapport between my students and I, specifically this one student. And she began to talk a lot more, although she had a speech delay. She began to try to talk more. And as she began to talk more, I began to understand more. And this was something that was a goal of mine that I had written early on in the beginning of the year, that I wanted to help her gain confidence in speaking, as well as improve test scores and all of these things. And, I spoke with the person who was helping her with her English language learning, who was helping her with her disability. And there was, again, the sentiment of like, she cannot do this. Like, she has all of these things. And I was like, but I think she can though. And then, so I would just continue doing what I was doing, extra support, talking through things. And at the end of the year, she had over a 200% growth in her iReady score. And this was something that, people could not believe, because she can't do it, but she can do it. And I think that was something that was really important to me, not only in the what can happen when you believe in students and create space, but also when you don't succumb to the challenges of the environment that you're in. And I never want to say that the educators in this space were bad people, had bad ideas about students. I think that this is a very tough space. I don't want to ever give the idea that Title I spaces don't come with their own individual challenges. But I think for me, it was motivation to never let my starry-eyedness or this motivation, this idea of every child can actually be successful as long as we are supportive in whatever that success looks like. And I think that is what has kept me married to Title I in this space, has kept me married to historically resilient communities and resilient children in this space. But also, how do we build capacity for all teachers to create the space that I did in that environment?
I love how you told that story, because my research, there's two things that you said. One was caring in the camera. So you need to write that down, because that needs to be a whole thing that you write about. Is that the reason why we're doing momentum conversations is because we experienced in our doctoral program online caring in the camera. As people who were experiencing things from all different backgrounds, we somehow came together in all different ways, and had the opportunity to share. So caring in the camera is possible when there are conversations and space made to cultivate the kind of conversations that bring that kind of belonging, that kind of agency. And when people are not aware of how to do that, Dr. Brianna, when they don't know how to do that, they don't even know that it's possible, they will give those kind of narratives of it can't be done, it can't be done, it can't be done. And so, one of the things that I try to share with people as part of being a community organizer is that the story doesn't necessarily have to be your story. That student was part of your story, but her story of resilience, her story of empowerment, her story of continually trying to be a part of the community.
Yeah.
That right there was what was driving. And when we're talking about marginalized and high poverty communities, what we're not giving enough credit to, which I've said in my research, was we have not created the space. We have not made the culture that we cultivate, the way that we bring restorative practices into an environment is actually the reason why so many of our children in Title I schools are quote unquote underperforming. It's because we have not created that space. We have not created that space for their community, their village, their parents, themselves. We have not created adequate space for people to have the conversation to say, wait a minute, there is a can in this. There is a caring in this. There is capacity here. And when we don't do that, it makes the children suffer. And I don't think the connection is being made. One of the things that we had to do, Dr. Brianna, was, and you remember this, when we started to do our environmental scan, if you remember, we were told to first center the policy. Center the policy and then think about how what you want to study is influenced by policy. And so oftentimes people do not even consider that we're operating as teachers, educators, practitioners under the guise of some policy that was created somewhere and is now being implemented, oftentimes without accountability or without any consideration of the policy cycle and implementation. So when you're in that situation, we're looking at your story as one where you're saying, no, this child was put in this environment with all of these things stacked against her: language, ability, you know, proximity, right? All of these things that are impacting her. But I believe that she can. And so I'm going to challenge all of the she can't
Right.
to be able to get her to her success. And so with that as your frame, you came into like, no, I'm going to do my research on what I know they can do. And so I want you to talk about what made you decide to look at journaling. Well, and you know what? Let me say this first. I always do this, Brianna. I have to ask people to say the title of their research. Now, I have always made it clear that I forget mine oftentimes.
What is my title?
So I have it here if you want me to say it.
Please.
Okay. Because I'm not the only one. Everyone else was like,
I know it. I know like most of it, but
right.
Once defense and like graduation happens, it's like
exactly. So let me tell them what your research was. From Pencils to Purpose: Exploring Journaling as an Anti-Racist Instructional Tool to Foster Psychological Safety and Belonging for Black and Brown Students in Title I ELA Classrooms. That was your title. So you and I both have titles that I remember the first 4 words, and that is From Pencils to Purpose, which is what I do. Mine is Adam, Where Art Thou? So after that,
and I remember yours. I remember the first 4. I like everything before the semicolon. Yes,
exactly.
I remember.
Exactly. So tell me What was it that made you lean into the ELA classroom, Title One? We talked about those things, but talk about the whole idea of journaling as an anti-racist instructional tool.
Mm. So I want to be quite honest in sharing that journaling is something I did in my classroom. This journaling was something that I want to say I started doing my first year, not only as a writing exercise, but also as a thought exercise. And it was something that I was able to get kind of like my whole grade band on to doing, and then eventually something that all ELA third to fifth grade started doing. Um, and I think that by virtue of being an ELA teacher, I am a journalist by trade, so writing is very important. But something really important to me in my own practice and into my intervention was making journaling accessible. And so, again, I talked to you about having served students with disabilities, students who are a couple grade levels behind, and students who are English language learners. So it was very important to me that if students could not formulate words or were not comfortable in formulating words through writing, that there were accessibility options. So students could draw and respond. Students could respond verbally to this journal prompt or whatever made sense for them and created that form of psychological safety for them in that moment. And then I started looking at, so there was like the practice that I thought about. And then I started looking at anti-racism. And I was saying to myself, if I was going to do this, I didn't want to solely base my journal prompts or journaling as a practice on my experience or my potential bias. And so I had conversations with some of our cohort members who were Black educators nationally and kind of like ran this by them because a lot of folks taught different grades, have experiences in different places to kind of like gauge what their thought was. And then I started diving deep into anti-racist practice and what does this look like in introducing something new in research. And if I was going to introduce something, it had to center historically resilient communities. It had to be accessible. It had to be equitable. It had to be something that was, as much as I could make it separate of white supremacy culture, it had to be. This is why there is no grading of journaling. The teacher does not collect the journals in my intervention. It's something that also worked in my classroom as well. I didn't know that it was anti-racist or separate of white supremacy in that moment, but it was very intentional in my intervention. This was not something that the teacher read unless the students created their own norms in community and decided who would share based on who wanted to share, and that was affirmed by the teacher, but the teacher never touched their journals. They decorated their own journals. All of these things were micro but very intentional for me as the researcher to make sure that I was putting anti-racism at the center and equity at the center in all of these ways. And that is where journaling came, but I think the methodology in which I introduced journaling was even more important to me than the practice, and the way that it was introduced and the protocol behind it. And I think that is why I landed in the space that I did. And I think that what that from the research that I collected was really helpful for students.
You mentioned students being able to journal and their teachers not looking at it.
Mhm.
What would you say to someone that says, well, wouldn't that be a waste of time for this teacher not to look at their work? What would your response be to someone who has that idea?
I understand why a teacher would have that idea. When we think about conventional schooling, when we think about the way that colonization shows up in these spaces, especially in Title One spaces, because we talked about the grit and the resilience in Title One, but we didn't talk about the racism that still perpetuates Title One. And I think
Absolutely.
that Brown v. Board did great things, but it didn't eliminate everything. It didn't eliminate whiteness in curriculum. It didn't erase all of these things. If anything, it took Black folks and Black educators and leaders out of these spaces. And so I think we need to have a very honest conversation about where this yearn for control over student narratives comes from, because that is very much what that is. And I think that from the very beginning, when I talked to the teacher who was one of my participants for this research, it was very clear that this research is completely separate of academia. I'm not looking at your iReady scores. I'm not looking at student grades. And it's very intentional that we're starting your first and your second period with the first 15 minutes being devoted to student psychological safety and belonging. For the first 15 minutes, unless you are reading the journal prompt to the students, you do not speak. This is and is very intentional. I was very honest and intentional about that. This is where you decenter self. This is where students take control. And this is where students show up, and that power dynamic is intentionally reversed. And I can understand why a teacher who showed up in this space had 25 years of experience. This is a white woman educator in a majority Black district, a Title I district, and had been very experienced in serving Black children. And to be honest with you, and this is from what she has shared. And so there was this kind of like, okay, like I'm willing to walk with you, but there are questions. And even in my final sections of my dissertation, when I had the final interview with the teacher, I asked for feedback. I asked for feedback in terms of, if you could have made this process better, any feedback, if we wanted to introduce this at a countywide, like some type of initiative, what would your feedback be? And although she realized this was great, like this, I was able to see more of my students. I realized that I need to center their narratives more, all of these things. She was still saying that I wish I would have been able to grade it. And I think that that's a psychological tug of war. I think that, and I mean, who am I to think that this was going to change in 6 weeks? But I think that it highlighted something that was very important, that this detachment of what school is supposed to be, what a teacher's role is supposed to be, how teachers have been conditioned to conceptualize their role as power dominant, narrative dominant, and knowledge holders, instead of knowledge seekers in spaces with other experts, co-constructors of knowledge, co-designers of knowledge. And I think that is something that showed me, although we're moving this needle towards equity, there are still those roadblocks that we have to get over psychologically to help teachers and leaders in this space understand the power of student-centered identity. My intervention was also rooted in Ubuntu pedagogy, and that is, I am because we are, not I am therefore you are. Like, you know what I mean? And I think that that's very important to me, to address that very early on, but also recognize that the work is yet to be finished.
Absolutely. So I could go three different directions with what you said, but I'm going to go down this lane and hope we can circle back. You said she had 25 years of practice serving those students. In all transparency, I have shared my story here of being an educator who wasn't able to do 25 years for the purpose of that, because of power dynamics. Because I was unable to continue to engage in practice that I know did not serve my students. It did not serve them. I knew that I was imposing harm on them by trying to make them embrace context, well, text,
Yep.
the context of their classroom environment, where I was supposed to whitewash, in a sense, their experiences and the curriculum and the design and the practices did not center them. It did not. It was, this is what you want them to do. These are the skills you want them to have. And you get them to perform on these assessments any way you can. But that idea of psychological safety and belonging was not the main focal point. And what I found as a practitioner was, when I gave them texts that looked like them, when I gave them scenarios that were relative to their bus ride from one side of the city to another, when they could come in the room and journal for the first 10 to 15 minutes, they could say, I never forget one of my students where she was like, yes, can I get my journal? Because her mother made her so mad about washing dishes that morning. And she knew that her journal was the place where she could say what she needed to say
Right.
about her mom. And then she was ready to learn. Then she could receive from me. But she ran in there and grabbed that journal so fast because she was so upset. I remember it to this day. She's now a teacher, by the way. But she
Wow.
understood that
Yeah.
that was what she needed to do to be able to get her mind ready to learn. So I want us to talk about the microaggressions of being a Black teacher. You mentioned I'm conflating these two things that you said. Brown versus Board of Ed, which I center in my research. That was the policy that I looked at, because I looked at how Black men engage in the activism for that for that separate but equal decision. Those were Black men. Thurgood Marshall, Black men. Those were Black men who advocated for that, and much of it was strategic around how do we win this case
Absolutely.
of these fathers coming and saying, wait a minute, my children are in a setting where they don't have equal access. They weren't saying they were getting poor education. They said we don't have equal access to
Hmm.
certain things. So I'm conflating these two. I'm conflating the idea of voice around equality, equity in schools, around policy that says, okay, these are our teachers who are culturally responsive, because those were all Black schools, right? And then putting on side of that what you're talking about in terms of colonizing the education, where there's this power dynamic that I have to impose upon you these skills that will be assessed on this test, right? That is really going to say this is what says you're learning. And that is what's coming out of that teacher saying, but I really do want to grade it, but I want to grade it, but I want to grade it, because it is power. It is power that can absolutely go onto that child, that then you are the one that is pulling and tugging at their psychological stability, their sense of belonging, their sense of self-esteem, their whole educational experience, right? You have the strings. You're controlling the narrative, because that child could have written a beautiful poem about their experience with their mom that morning, demonstrating that they can do haiku poetry and all of those things that are in the skills, but they didn't do it on the day it was assigned, right? As the guided practice, it wasn't in the the scope and sequence. So guess what? Now I have to tell this child, oh, or these parents, it wasn't done on my time the way I need to see it show up. And Black teachers had rooms of children that were on every different level. So that was not the point. The point was to take the child from wherever they were, give them a sense of esteem and self and a passion and desire for learning, and let them go. That is the complete opposite of what we're seeing in classrooms right now, Brianna. The complete opposite. And so, where I offer another question to you is, what do you say to those who are in decision making positions around hiring practices right now in Title I schools? What is what should we be looking at as the policies that we as a community should be saying, hold on, this is the follow up to, yes, these children are in school. There, quote unquote, desegregation has happened, right? quote unquote, like I said. And while they're in concentrated places of poverty, this is what we need to see in the type of educator that comes in their space, the type of educator we want or practitioner we want in our schools. What would you say is needed to be able to deliver the type of environment that is safe, that has belonging, that's culturally responsive? What do you say to those hiring practitioners? What would your word of wisdom be for them? That was a lot, but
There's so much. And
mhm,
I think digging into this process, I realized that there was so much. I think I started to look at the Constitution of Georgia and the right that every child has to a quality education, but our state does not define what quality means. Because I can very well make the argument that Black children in metropolitan cities in South Atlanta are not getting a quality education, that they are not being given a constitutional right from their state. Um, I also think about the fact that there was a lack of policy around culturally relevance, around Ubuntu, around any type of liberatory consciousness. Like that was nowhere in this very Black district, um, in a Title I Black district, historically Black district. And I think coming into Georgia in the education space from Florida, being educated in Florida, Florida typically I want to say Florida is usually like in the top 10, 15 in the United States in terms of education. And
yeah,
I saw a very stark difference in like what the expectations were from an elementary school student when I was growing up and in the state of Georgia. In Florida, I want to say in fourth grade, we have to write a 5 paragraph essay or we do not go on to fifth grade. In Georgia, when I was teaching third grade, students had to write 3 sentences and that was an essay. Huh? Like
yeah,
that's a very big difference in term,
huge.
and that's a very big difference. And I think that's one thing, but I think it's not even that in Georgia in this county that I did my research in specifically, I can't even make the argument that we're sacrificing for academic achievement. Because I think that's a lot of the argument that you'll see, oh, we don't have space for this because we're so rigorous or we're preparing the next level of leaders. That's not here either. And so I think that there's a systemic approach that needs to happen. I think there needs to be a redesigned strategic plan in terms of what is the expectation from the top? Like what is our superintendent saying about cultural relevance, about cultural sustaining pedagogies? What does asset-based pedagogy mean? Is there talks about deficit-based learning? Are we just hiring teachers to have warm bodies in classrooms? But I think these things in the policy space and the strategy in me is saying that we need, I want to say this could even be a 5 to 10 year approach where we look at what does our personnel look like? What does our leadership look like? Who's leading professional development for every curriculum area? What is their role in finding where asset based pedagogy goes? Where does our required professional development live? What is missing from there? What literature, what evidence-based practices is missing from there? I think starting with what we do have and making sure that what we do have in this district is even more high quality, because I think it's foolish to expect teachers who are already overburdened, overwhelmed to do more on their own and expecting them to show up to your institution better when you're not giving them the resources to do so. So I think about making sure that we have progressive leadership that values these things, because if we do not, everyone beneath them are not going to value it either. It's not going to be a priority. So I think effective leadership, progressive leadership at the district level, at the superintendent's office level. And then I start thinking about where our district gets teachers from. So we're partnered with organizations like Teach for America, Urban Teachers, New Teacher, like all of these organizations
Yeah,
that also don't necessarily have that requirement. And if they do have this requirement, it comes at the lack of teacher preparation. And I don't think
yeah,
that we should have to choose between the two. I think we can be rigorous and culturally responsive. And I think that we have to create that ecosystem where both live in junction with each other. And I think that that starts with who we're partnering with. Are we partnering with Mercer? Are we partnering with Spelman? Are we partnering with the AUC? Like, what are we doing to make sure that those high quality teachers are coming to us and they understand the value of asset-based pedagogy? They resent deficit-based, and they know how to identify those things. And then what is the culture in our school building when teachers recognize these policies, whether written or not, that are inequitable and harming children? Are they ostracized like I was? Are they targeted and seen as the problem, or they're the new teacher, so they're not taken seriously? So I think there's so many levels to which that allows this school district, this state specifically, and this is not specific to Georgia. This is happens, I will argue this happens all over the South specifically, and then larger, more macro, it happens everywhere. And I think that if we want change, we have to be willing to put in the work to cultivate change, scale it, and make it sustainable. And I think that starts with the top, that starts with how we treat teachers who may have questions or want to bring new ideas into this space. And I think that really ventures to partnerships, the way that we collaborate within community, the way that we show up in different spaces, and the way that we support our teachers in making those transitions to more progressive and more successful impact in the classroom.
So one of the things that I highlight in momentum conversations is the why of the connection. So one of the things that you mentioned is why I've always looked at you and said, okay, there's another one. I see myself. I see a part of me in there. And you hit it. So once you hit that spot, I'm going there. Was around the issue of being ostracized because you are asset based. We talked about, oh no, I they can, and I'm going to find a way to create that opportunity. Um, you know, in my dissertation, well, in my defense, one of my first students from my first class was in my defense.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And she had just received her doctorate the week before, and I was in her defense. That role of, it's not even role, the relationship, the connection, the bond that I had with my students was one I was willing to fight for them. I was willing to speak for them. And because of that, ostracized. My voice was oftentimes a voice that would be heard, could be heard in the space. And people ask when, like I said, when this our graduation, our commencement went viral on TikTok, was the why, how did this happen? And the reason we're having momentum conversations is to be able to create a platform for people to understand there's some of the things that you have gone through in this anti-racist activism, scholar practitioner space. Anyone listening to this, I know, is saying, this girl knows her stuff. But now we move to the place of lived experience as that anti-racist practitioner that is going to call out whiteness, privilege, dominance in the process that hits you somewhere in your spirit and in your soul that you just can't keep doing it 25 years and not feel some kind of way about, wait a minute, when are we going to honor ourselves and others when we know there are other systems that are doing this differently? When I relocated from New York to DC, I saw some of the difference that you talked about. But then when I came from DC to Texas, it was even broader in many ways. Like you said, you're coming south. So you're seeing the educational system being shaped a certain way to create a certain labor force in the South. And it's all driven by capitalism and patriarchal systems that we recognize that's what it is. So let's call it that and let's address it as such. Well, now we're seeing this policy movement to back us up from doing that, to say, oh no, shut those anti-racist programs, DEI, all of that. We don't even want to have those conversations. Shut those down. And where we're having our conversation is right here. And I have to say that we're having it right here because those spaces for us, Dr. Brianna, to have these kind of conversations for the sake of changing changing the circumstances for students is not allowed. It's not being created. And so we are having to go in alternate spaces. We're needing to carve out our spaces. So why am I doing this? Because I'm hoping that people who are those leaders in school districts where they say no, we don't want to be that dominating thing, we want our children to do well, I want them to see us and say those are the people we need to talk to. Those are the people who can curate the environment where those hard conversations can be had. But we're not going to be the ones in some of those spaces where you would think we're going to be in the margins, because this kind of conversation is not mainstream conversation right now.
Absolutely.
Mainstream conversation right now is, oh, we have to shut all of that down. And I am hearing so many people say, oh, well, we can't do that because that's the just because you're mentioning the author of a black author of a book. They're feeling that they cannot even go to Black literature, African American literature, because of fear and intimidation. So I say all of that to say is that when you're talking about your experience, your lived experience, I need you to talk about what is at the heart right now for you in that space. Like around, I kind of shared mine about feeling ostracized, feeling the rejection, even though you know your stuff, but having to be pushed aside, or even if you're not pushed aside, you're burnout, you're tired, you're weary. And that's a whole nother episode of when we get weary in the well-doing. I would love for you to talk about like what does that feel like in real time, Brianna, like in those spaces, whether it be in your research, whether it be in your work, whether it be in your observation, what does that feel like as a practitioner? It's a very vulnerable question. So,
Yeah. And thank you for it. I think, and we've had this conversation before. I think that in this moment, I'm reminded of a prophet from the Bible. I'm reminded of Habakkuk. And I think about how before him, a lot of what we've seen a prophet do was to be God's mouthpiece to the people. And that's great, right? Like that
mhm,
works. But I think where he comes in is he kind of flips the script and recognizes God as, you know, who he is, but also has some questions. And I think
yes,
that's very powerful. And not just any questions, I think questions understanding the doctrine and saying something isn't adding up.
mhm,
These are your people. You
mhm,
love us. You hate injustice, but you allow it. You're not
mhm,
here when wickedness happens. Oppression, capitalism is happening and you're silent. And I think the audacious nature of someone to love God so much and be like, but you're not doing what you said you do. And I think I'm in a space where I'm existing in a place that doesn't recognize my gift as a gift. And that is okay because I'm not the first one to ever track this territory. And I think that even thinking about God's response is write the vision, make it plain, and wait. Wait. And I think that is the prophecy for me in this moment, is you showed up, you did the work, you put my people first. And not just the people who were convenient, not the people you could talk to get it done, not just your friends. Like, you went out there and did the work. And you put the work in, you did the research, you showed up for this community in ways that a lot of researchers would not do. And
Right.
you were brave in this space. Now it's time for you to wait on me to do my part. And I think that that's the space that I'm in looking at my work as prophecy, and looking at the fact that God values truth in a lot of ways that we don't really talk about. And I think truth and reality and justice and freedom of the vulnerable is really who God is. And I think that I'm standing in a vision, prepared, waiting, knowing that it will surely come. And I think that a lot of us are in this space. I think, as a knowledge seeker, as a knowledge haver, as someone who shows up with gift and prioritizing advocacy and justice and freedom for marginalized, disenfranchised, vulnerable people, this isn't the time and place where it's going to be widely accepted. But neither was Jesus. So it's like, I think about the footsteps I'm standing in a different time, in a different place, but the reality and the challenge of the work remains the same. And I think, as I'm navigating this new space, being fresh out of a program that's supposed to be, prestigious, it's supposed to open doors, I'm sitting in a space where I'm preparing myself for when Shirley will come.
I absolutely 100% agree with that statement. We are in similar position, knowing that it's going to come. We know that it's going to come. We've done the work to be able to look at the past too. I think what I appreciated about this process was having to look at things from a policy lens allowed me to see the strategy moves, the way the chess were moved, the way the pawns were moved across, the pieces were moved across the board. I was able to see how political that was.
Absolutely.
And being, Brianna, that you are a person that you have that strong interest in policy as well. Our program was education, policy, and leadership. Some people lean more into the leadership piece. Some of us leaned into the policy piece. I lean more into the policy piece because I recognize that everything related to Jesus was political.
Absolutely. We missed
right?
that.
Everything was political.
Absolutely.
And we are missing, as believers, as inspired practitioners that allow the Spirit to sit with us, guide us, and give us instruction. As that kind of practitioner, I recognize that we're watching these political moves being made, where it is every attempt is being made to make sure that we don't see justice, that we don't see equity, that we don't see humanity, we don't see God's love. We don't. They'll put the name on it, they'll put the title on it, they'll say that it's love and it's okay, it's Christian, it's all of it. They'll put that name on it, but at the heart of it is our lies, deceit, manipulation, deception, and the total opposite of truth. So, as you were saying, how we are sitting in this moment, in this time, waiting, my hope and my prayer is that as people are listening to Momentum Conversations and they say, what was that? And they hear the answer to the question is, it was God. It was a God moment.
Through and through.
It was a God moment where all of us who have been moving by the Spirit, in one moment it came together. It just so happened that I had the last name. It just so happened that, I laugh at one of my cohort members that y'all know, like, is Martina Luther King. Like, that's the joke, right? And so it just so happened, but it was that. It was from pencil to purpose. It was our writing, and it was us, each of us standing in the place of purpose.
Yeah.
And we know that our journeys all were very different, but it landed us at the same place in time. A moment where God came down and the glory of his presence and how he had been with us came together. And in that moment, we were all able to say, we're still in the fight. We're still a group of people that are here. you haven't, you may have tried to take us out. We have felt the marginalization. We have felt ostracized. We have felt disenfranchised. We've taken every hit for being that mouthpiece that says social justice should be the case. And so I'm gonna have to just end this with this part of what you mentioned about the book of Habakkuk, where it talks about learning how to trust God. That is what that book is about. Is where he's like you said, I got questions. I'm wondering some things. And in his question, his response was to go write the vision and write it clearly on clay tablets, so whoever reads it can run to tell others it is not yet time for the message to come true, but that time is coming soon. The message will come true. It may seem like a long time, but be patient and wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not be delayed. The evil nation is very proud of itself. It is not living as it should, but those who are right with God will live by trusting in him. And so I'm ending on that, because this conversation is always to be continued with the understanding that that time is coming soon.
Absolutely.
And these conversations are, in a way, the writing down of the vision. Our dissertations are done. That's done. That's there. You can see the work was done. I said that in my defense. We did the work. It's not about the work. Now it's about the weight. The weight that we sit and we say, it's got to go down first. You're going to have to crash and burn. But in the meantime, we are here having conversations that my hope is families and communities can hear you, Dr. Brianna, and they can say, well, wait a minute. At home, I think I'm going to just start to give them a journal. And before dinner, just sit down and journal. That our families will take 15 minutes to read a book before dinner. It looks different, but put the screens down and just read a book, a quick book, quick scripture, anything. Putting language, words, and speaking into the environment what needs to be said to this next generation. I said I was going to close, but there was one question I did not get to, and I got to get to this, and then we'll close this out. But what we talked about was intergenerational conversations, and as we sat in the first episode and we heard Dr. Pamela Higgins Harris talk about being on AU's campus at 18 in 1968 after King had been assassinated. And she talked about how she stepped into that campus and her experience. Well, Brianna, I'm not gonna tell your age, but just know, y'all, like, her way of saying this is she went straight from pre-K to doctor. So I'm gonna let y'all figure that out. You can figure out her age from there. Literally, she went from pre-K to her doctor program, never taken a break from school. But Brig, what would you say for your generation? I want you to speak to what you want your statement to be. Here it is, from Dr. Pamela, 1968 AU to 2025 Brianna AU. What statement would you make from the platform right now in your generation?
I think my generation is very interesting and innovative in a lot of ways. And my encouragement would be to use that innovation to the advantage of not only yourself, but the community. And the community meaning whatever that looks like for you. Um, and I think that I'm not going to sit here and be like, everyone get a doctorate. I'm not going to say everybody go to college. That's not everybody's journey. But I think that there are incredible opportunities that we have now to make change that didn't exist before. I think we have all of the things before us and more. And I believe in social responsibility. I believe in civic responsibility. And I believe that it is the job of us, especially historically marginalized people, historically resilient people, Black folks, to ensure that our community is better when we leave it than when we found it. And I think if that's through influencer culture, do it. If that's through public health and fitness culture, do it. If that's through writing and research, do it. But keep in mind the betterment of who you are and where you come from. And I think that is what's missing at the piece. I think we miss the intergenerational value. I think because every generation before is like, oh, everyone's rebel who comes after me. Like they said that about like student protests. They say that about like Gen X. Like I mean, it is what it is. It comes with the territory. But I think the key is the wisdom in passing the baton to the next generation, and that's something that I prioritize, and that is something that I think our generation would be a lot better, a lot more well equipped to take on what's next, what's in front of us, with that wisdom and that partnership of those who came before us. We stand on big shoulders, so don't fall. And I think that's really important to me, to recognize the shoulders that I stand on and the shoes of those people I'm standing on as well. And it goes way back further than I can even imagine. This dream, this life I live was planted in someone's brain a long, long time before I was even thought about. But the vision was there, and I think it's my job to do my part, in whatever way, whatever talent God has given me, to exercise that part in that movement of the community. And I would encourage anybody in my generation to figure out where you fit in and make sure that you're bringing people with you there.
Dr. Brianna, there is nothing else to say after that, ma'am. I am on, I have to contact Dr. Pamela on this one, and Dr. Darla. You are standing on big shoulders, so don't fall. That quote right there, bars, girl, that right there.
I mean it. I don't think we realize that.
Yes.
There are people before us that we know, like, our grandparents, our great grandparents, but I don't think we understand what it took to be on that shoulder, and even more the responsibility to stay on it. And I think that that's really important, and I want that to stick with people in my generation, people not in my generation, that there's a responsibility to move forward, and how dare you not? And I think that that's a really big part of who I am and the way that I show up, and I want to encourage everybody to do the same.
I love it. I love it. Thank you again. And I am going to end this episode of Momentum Conversations from Pencil to Purpose. And you can go to the website, themomentumexperience.com, if you are interested and connecting with Dr. Brianna. She is available for consulting. She will go there. You will see her business information, her contact information if you are interested in hearing more. If you don't want to wait, you don't have to wait. You can contact her right now and we can make something happen. So thank you for joining us for Momentum Conversations. See you next time.